On the morning of my 60th birthday, I walked to my front door expecting warmth, maybe a surprise from my son, or even just a kind gesture to remind me I was still loved, still remembered. Instead, there was a knock. A delivery man handed me a bouquet of roses, deep red, tied neatly with satin ribbon. For a moment I smiled because roses had always been my favorite. But then I saw the card. It wasn't the usual happy birthday, Mom, or wishing you joy. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. And the words? They cut through me like ice. Rest in peace. Signed my daughter-in-law. I stood there frozen, the flowers trembling in my hands, my breath catching in my chest. Rest in peace. On my birthday. I read it over and over again, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of cruel mistake? A joke in bad taste? Or was she really telling me she wished me gone? The walls of my home suddenly felt colder. The silence heavier. I had known Emily could be unkind, sharp-tongued, dismissive of me. But this was something else. Something that felt like an attack, a message. One I was never meant to forget. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply placed the bouquet on the kitchen table and sat across from it, staring. For hours I stared at those roses. Beautiful on the outside, but carrying death in their message. The cruelest birthday gift I had ever received. I wanted to believe my son knew nothing about it. That he wouldn't let such venom come through his own front door. But then I remembered moments, quiet conversations cut short when I entered the room. The way he sometimes looked away when Emily belittled me. How easily he defended her while brushing me aside. And a dreadful thought took root. Had he known? Had he allowed it? I felt humiliation, yes. But beneath that, something colder began to settle. A kind of resolve I hadn't felt in years. If she thought this was the end of me, she was wrong. And here's the part Emily never saw coming. What I sent back to her the next morning wasn't flowers, wasn't forgiveness, wasn't silence. It was something far heavier, a truth she had hidden. One that would tear open her carefully polished life. Before I tell you how that unfolded, I need to say this. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. Don't just listen in silence. Your support means the world. Now let me take you back, not just to that day, but to the years that built up to it. Because betrayal doesn't come out of nowhere. It builds, it hides, and then one day, it delivers roses with a note that says rest in peace. I was not born into ease. My life was built on long days, sacrifices no one saw, and a heart that refused to give up no matter how heavy the burden. When my husband died, David was only 15. I remember sitting in the dark of our small kitchen that first night, staring at the empty chair across from me, wondering how I would do it. But I did. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep food on the table and the lights on. I gave up new clothes, vacations, and simple comforts because my son's future mattered more than mine. Every dime I earned, I stretched until it screamed, and every prayer I whispered was for him to rise above the shadows I carried alone. When he graduated college, I cried harder than I did the day he was born. I thought I did it. He made it. That was the one gift I gave myself, the belief that my sacrifices were not in vain. When David introduced me to Emily, I wanted to love her. I wanted to welcome her like the daughter I never had. She was young, polished, full of energy, and she knew exactly how to charm a room. I remember she shook my hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But I ignored it. Love can make you blind, but so can hope. I thought, if she makes my son happy, then she will make me happy too. At first, everything seemed smooth. They planned their wedding, they bought a house, and for a while, my son still called me every evening the way he used to. But gradually, those calls grew fewer. His visits shorter. His words sharper. And when Emily was around, the air between us changed. It started small. A comment about my cooking, too old-fashioned. A remark about my clothes, outdated. The kind of jabs you could almost brush aside if you weren't paying attention. But I paid attention. I saw the way she pulled David's arm when he lingered too long at my table. I heard the way she sighed when he asked if I needed help with groceries. She wanted me on the outside, and little by little, that's where I found myself. Still, I told myself, don't complain. Don't make waves. Let him have his life. I swallowed my pride 1,000 times, because I thought silence was better than distance. But silence doesn't protect you from people who are determined to erase you. On the morning of my 60th birthday, I woke up with a childlike hope I hadn't felt in years. 60 is not just a number. It is a lifetime of memories, of giving, of surviving. I thought maybe, just maybe, my son would come through the door with Emily, carrying a cake, smiling, telling me I mattered. I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking louder with each passing hour. Noon came. 2 o'clock passed. No call. No visit. When the knock finally came, my heart leapt. I hurried to the door, smoothing my sweater, telling myself this was it. But it wasn't my son. It was a delivery man, holding a bouquet of roses so beautiful they almost made me weep. Roses meant love. Roses meant someone cared. Until I opened the card. Rest in peace. My hands shook. My chest tightened. I looked at the handwriting, bold and unmistakable. Emily's name at the bottom, signed as if she were proud of the message. I whispered it aloud, my voice trembling. Rest in peace. On my birthday. My 60th. The day I should have felt most alive, most celebrated. Humiliation surged first. To imagine she thought so little of me, that she would use a gift to mock my existence. Then came the rage, hot, biting, impossible to swallow. And beneath it all, heartbreak. Not because of the card itself, but because it told me something I had feared for years. She wanted me gone. Erased. Out of her way. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at those roses as if they might change their meaning if I looked long enough. But they didn't. Their beauty mocked me. Every petal whispered death. I thought back to all the times Emily had made comments about my age. She once laughed that I belonged in a rocking chair, instead of helping with Thanksgiving dinner. Another time, she called me old baggage, when she thought I couldn't hear. I heard. I remembered. And suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip of the tongue or a card sent in error. It was intentional. A message delivered straight to my heart, telling me I was unwelcome, unneeded, and unwanted. But here's the truth Emily never knew. I have walked through too much fire to let roses bury me. And if she thought this was the end, she had no idea who she was dealing with. After that birthday, the air between us grew heavier. I could no longer pretend that Emily's cruelty was harmless. The card had been too deliberate, too pointed. Yet, what unsettled me more than her venom was the quiet silence of my son. David didn't call. He didn't ask how my birthday was. He didn't ask if I'd received anything. He asked nothing at all. That silence echoed louder than Emily's words. When I saw him next, he stood in my doorway with that same distracted look he often carried now. I tried to read his eyes, searching for any flicker of guilt, any recognition that something was wrong. But there was nothing. He spoke about his work, about errands, about how Emily was busy. He never once asked if I had celebrated, never once mentioned the bouquet. I watched his mouth move, and in my heart, a seed of doubt grew into something darker. Did he know? Was he part of it? I remembered a night not long before, when I visited unexpectedly. They were in the kitchen, voices low, but not low enough. I had paused in the hallway, my bag still in hand, when I heard him say, "She's not going to be around much longer anyway." The words struck me like a stone then, but I brushed them aside, thinking maybe he meant something else, something lighter. But after that card, those words replayed in my mind until they twisted into knives. Did he mean me? Did my own son believe I was disposable? That thought broke me in a way Emily never could. Because I could survive her scorn. I could endure her insults. But the idea that my only child might share in that contempt, it hollowed me out. I began to do something I never thought I would. I watched. Quietly. Carefully. Not out of curiosity, but out of survival. Emily had shown me she was capable of cruelty. Now I needed to know what else she was capable of. At first I noticed the phone calls. Late at night, when David was asleep, I would hear her voice carry faintly through the walls when I stayed over to help them. She would step out onto the porch, whispering, her tone softer, more playful than I had ever heard it with my son. She laughed in a way she never laughed with him. It was a sound meant for someone else. Then came the packages. Small deliveries she snatched before David could see them. Once, I saw her slide a box into the trunk of her car, her eyes darting around as if the whole world were watching. She was careful, but not careful enough for me. And then there were the outings. She told David she was going to meet friends, but she dressed differently, too carefully, for casual gatherings. I watched her apply perfume, glance at her reflection in the mirror, and smile in a way she never smiled for my son. It ate at me. Not just the betrayal of my son, but the cruelty of knowing she mocked me while she betrayed him. She wanted me gone, erased, while she lived a double life right under his nose. I knew I couldn't stay blind. I had spent too many years sacrificing for my son to let him walk into the arms of someone who wished both of us broken. So I started looking. Quietly, carefully. I checked trash bags when I visited. I found receipts tucked into her purse when she left it on the counter. Expensive dinners for two at restaurants my son had never been to. Hotel charges for nights she had told David she was visiting her sister. The pieces began to fit together, each one tightening the knot in my chest. But the proof that sealed it came in the form of letters. She kept them hidden in a small drawer in her study, folded carefully beneath papers. I don't know why I opened that drawer, but something pulled me toward it. And there they were, handwritten notes, filled with words of passion and longing. But the name at the bottom was the wound that cut deepest. Michael. David's oldest friend. The boy who had grown up in my living room, who had eaten at my table, who had once called me a second mother. Michael. He was the one. He was the man she risked everything for. I sat in that chair, those letters trembling in my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt a sob rise that I couldn't hold back. Not because of Emily's betrayal. I had expected that in some way. But because of the cruelty of it being Michael. To take my son's friend, the one he trusted most, and use him as a weapon against us both. I wanted to march into their bedroom, throw those letters onto their bed, and watch the fire burn. I wanted to scream until my throat tore. But then I remembered the roses, the card, the words "rest in peace." She had tried to humiliate me, to bury me in silence. That was when I realized, my revenge could not be loud. It had to be quiet, sharp, precise. I recalled the lessons life had carved into me. When you shout, people turn away. When you strike too openly, they defend themselves. But when you let the truth walk in on its own, it cannot be denied. The truth destroys all on its own. So I made a decision. I would not confront her. I would not argue, would not plead, would not shout. I would let Emily's own lies choke her. I would use her betrayal as the rope she had tied herself. All I had to do was hold the other end. That night, as I sat alone in my kitchen, the letters spread before me, I began to form a plan. Not quick, not reckless, but deliberate, patient. A plan that would return to her exactly what she had sent me, but heavier. Not flowers, not a card, but the truth. A truth so devastating she could never laugh in my face again. And for the first time since those roses arrived at my door, I felt calm. Because I knew Emily's day of reckoning was coming, and she would never see it until it was too late. On the night before I sent the package, I sat at my dining table with the evidence spread before me like broken pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to solve. There were the receipts, smeared with fingerprints and careless signatures, dinners for two at places I had never been invited. There were the hotel confirmations, tucked neatly into a drawer as if secrecy could erase betrayal. And then the letters. Her handwriting was unmistakable, flowing across the page with declarations of passion that were never meant for my son. Each word cut deeper than the last. I gathered them all with steady hands, not in anger but in resolve. I placed them into an envelope, careful, deliberate, as though arranging an offering to the truth itself. At the top of the stack, I placed one final note, written in my hand. Truth always returns home. When the package was sealed, I called the same delivery service she had used. I wanted it poetic, precise. The man who had once handed me roses carrying the sting of mockery, would now carry a box heavy with secrets that could not be buried. As I handed it over, my heart did not race, nor did my fingers tremble. Instead, I felt an odd calmness, the kind that comes only when you know justice is already in motion. The next morning, as dawn broke quietly across the street, I waited by my kitchen window. I knew the delivery schedule. I had memorized the rhythm of those footsteps, the sound of tires crunching gravel. And there it was, right on time. I saw the familiar truck stop before her house. I pictured her opening the door, expecting something sweet, maybe even believing her cruel joke had left me broken. I could almost see her smirk as she reached for the box. But then came the moment I had anticipated. The sudden pause, the sharp gasp. I didn't need to be inside her living room to hear it. I felt it echo in the silence around me. She must have slit the tape with eager fingers, expecting perhaps chocolates, or maybe an apology from me, something to feed her ego. But instead, she was met with a mirror of her own treachery. Her affair was no longer private, no longer shielded in secrecy. She had wanted to bury me with flowers, but instead, she was buried under the weight of her own choices. Later that day, the storm inside their home broke loose. I heard the raised voices, the muffled shouts that carried through the thin walls of memory. David's tone was one I had not heard since he was a boy, hurt, desperate, incredulous. He confronted her with the receipts, the photographs, the letters. He asked questions she could not answer. Her voice, sharp and defensive, clawed back at him. She tried to blame me, calling me vindictive, a manipulator, a woman too bitter to let her son live freely. But the evidence was not mine, it was hers. She had written the words, signed the receipts, made the choices. I had only held up the mirror. I stayed in my own home in silence. I did not need to shout. I did not need to defend myself. The truth was speaking louder than any voice I could muster. That night, their lights stayed on until the small hours of the morning. I imagined the arguments circling endlessly, the accusations, the tears, the denials. But once the truth is set free, it does not return to the shadows. It wasn't long before she came to my door. Her footsteps were furious on the wooden porch. When I opened the door, she did not hesitate. Her eyes blazed with a rage that masked her fear. She accused me of destroying her marriage, of plotting against her, of poisoning David against her. She shouted words meant to wound. "You're nothing but a witch. You've always been jealous, always meddling." Her chest heaved with anger, but beneath it all I saw the cracks. I saw the panic of a woman who knew her carefully built lies were crumbling. I did not raise my voice. I did not let her venom sink into me. Instead, I stood in the doorway, steady, unyielding, and I said only this. "You sent me death on my birthday." I simply sent back the truth. The silence that followed was heavier than her shouting had ever been. She froze, as though the weight of those words had pressed her into the floor. For a moment, her eyes faltered, darting away from mine, because even she could not deny the fairness of what had been done. She had struck first, cruel and calculated, and I had answered without a single lie, without a single false word. She turned then, spitting curses into the air, but they no longer had power. Her anger did not belong to me. It belonged to the truth she could no longer escape. As I closed the door gently behind her, I felt not triumph, but something deeper. A quiet justice, the kind that does not need to announce itself to be real. In that stillness, I understood something. Revenge does not always come in flames or fury. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the return of truth, in the calm assurance that no lie can stay hidden forever. She had tried to write my ending in roses and ink, but I had written hers with nothing more than her own hand. The days that followed were heavy with silence, the kind that settles over a house when trust has been shattered beyond repair. David walked like a shadow of himself, his shoulders bent as though he carried stones no one else could see. For years, he had defended Emily, had looked at me with suspicion whenever I questioned her words or actions. Now he could no longer deny the truth that stared him in the face. I watched him from a distance, a man caught between two worlds, loyalty to the woman he married and love for the mother who raised him alone. His silence was not ignorance. It was grief, grief for the family he thought he had, grief for the illusions now scattered across the floor. One evening he came to my house. He stood at the doorway like a boy again, hesitant, unsure. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked, not from anger but from sorrow. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. You gave me everything, and I let her make me blind to who you are." His words broke something inside me, yet they also mended a part of me I thought had been lost forever. I took his hand in mine, the same hand I had held when he was small, and I told him there was nothing to forgive. "Sometimes love blinds us," I said. "What matters is the moment we finally open our eyes." Emily, however, did not search for forgiveness. She lashed out in the only way she knew how, by spinning webs of lies to anyone who would listen. She told her friends I had planted the evidence, that I had invented her affair to tear them apart. She stood in living rooms and kitchens, her voice sharp, her face etched with desperation, trying to rewrite the story. But whispers have a way of cutting through even the loudest protests. The truth travels faster than lies when the evidence is undeniable. Soon, neighbors turned their heads when she walked past. Friends stopped answering her calls. At the grocery store, people whispered behind shelves, their eyes following her like shadows she could not escape. The man she had betrayed my son with, David's best friend, did not step forward to claim her, not when the light of exposure burned hot. He distanced himself, leaving her to bear the shame alone. Her marriage was collapsing, and now the affair she had clung to slipped from her grasp as well. Out of spite, she filed for divorce, hoping to wound David further, hoping to leave destruction in her wake. But the act did not bring her victory, it only revealed her pettiness. In the community, she was no longer seen as a wife wronged, but as a woman who had built her life on betrayal and cruelty. The respect she once commanded was gone, leaving her standing on a hollow stage with no audience left to applaud. I did not celebrate her downfall. That was never the goal. My silent act of return had not been about breaking her. It had been about showing that I would not be erased. On my 60th birthday, she had tried to bury me beneath roses and a cruel message meant to humiliate me. But instead of sinking, I rose, not with fury but with dignity, not with shouts but with silence. The truth was never mine to create. It was hers all along, and all I did was place it back into her hands. As I looked back on those days, I understood something I had not known before. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it answers cruelty not with equal cruelty, but with the quiet certainty that lies cannot stand against light. I did not destroy Emily, she destroyed herself. My part was only to ensure the truth found its way home. On that birthday I was meant to be buried, dismissed, written off as old and irrelevant. Instead I reclaimed my place, not through anger, not through vengeance, but through the silent assurance that I mattered, that my story could not be ended by another's cruelty. My son saw me again. The community saw her for who she was. And I, on the day that should have been my ending, stood taller, stronger, unbroken. When I think back now, I no longer feel the sting of those roses, nor do I shudder at the words written in that cruel card. What stays with me is the lesson they carried. When family betrays you, the sharpest weapon isn't anger. It's truth. Anger burns too quickly, consumes you as much as it consumes them. But truth has a way of standing when everything else has fallen. It needs no defense, no noise, no performance. It simply exists, and in its presence lies collapse. Emily wanted to humiliate me on my 60th birthday, to bury me under her cruelty, to make me feel small, invisible, already forgotten. But instead, she ended up standing in the ruins of her own deceit. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I didn't claw at her with the same cruelty she had shown me. I let her words circle back to her. I let her deeds speak louder than anything I could ever say. She thought she could silence me with flowers, but she only silenced herself with truth. In the quiet of my home, I embraced something now that once felt like a burden, my age. 60 years of life, 60 years of struggle, of sacrifice, of raising a son alone, of standing when it would have been easier to fall. Age is not an insult, no matter how often it's used like a weapon. Age is proof. Proof of survival, proof of resilience, proof of strength earned and carried. She wanted me to rest in peace, but what she didn't realize is that peace isn't given by others. It's claimed by those who refuse to break. And so I stand, not bitter, not broken, but whole. My revenge was never about destruction. It was about recognition, about reclaiming my place, about reminding her, and even reminding myself, that no one can erase me. Not with roses. Not with words. Not with lies. I didn't send her flowers. I sent her herself. And that was enough. If you're still watching this, don't just leave quietly. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves stories of family, betrayal, and strength. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Don't disappear in silence. Let your voice be heard.